I read the scriptures, first of all, thank you for inviting me again. It's been about 12 months, I think, but it's lovely to be back and have the privilege of leading worship tonight. So thanks to David and for David for inviting me. I want to share with you a story, but a true story. A couple of weeks ago, Pastor Jeremy Parks and myself met Rachel, who's the chief exec at Salt Mines, in preparation for a service that we're going to have, a unity service with churches together in June in Dudley. And Rachel was telling us a story that moved us, and I want to share it with you just before I speak, so the time hasn't started for me to speak yet. And the story was that Rachel was in Birmingham, in the Bullring Centre, early one Saturday morning. And evidently, you'll know the church in the Bullring Centre, the one that is so active with people that live on the streets and the down and outs and the drug addicts. They do wonderful work. They have a prayer meeting there on a Saturday morning. And because she was in the city early, she decided that she would go and join that prayer meeting, which she did. After the prayer meeting, which is evidently a wonderful time of prayer together, people had made flasks of coffee. Every one of them at the prayer group took a cup of coffee and had it. And there was one flask left unopened. And someone said in the group, what a pity to throw that coffee away. Well, somebody else in the group said, well, look, I've got an hour to spare. Let me have some plastic cups and let me have that flask, and I will take it out and I will share it with those that are on the street. One flask of coffee. An hour and a half later, she was still distributing coffee, and that flask had not emptied. I leave your interpretation to yourselves, but I know what I believe. I know what I believe. I want to share with you just a few verses from Luke chapter 10, verses 25 to 29. A teacher of the law came up to Jesus and tried to trap him. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to receive eternal life? Jesus answered him, what do the scriptures say? And how do you interpret them? The man answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength, and love your neighbour as you love yourself. You are right, Jesus replied. Do this, and you will live. But the teacher of the law wanted to justify himself. So he said to Jesus, who is my neighbour? Who is my neighbour? The trap set by the teacher of the law had apparently been sprung, but not very successfully. How they thought they were going to trap, silence, contain this 30-year-old preacher, teacher, healer, one never knows. And in fact, if you think about it, it was rather naive. For it had been tried before. Other learned Jewish teachers had tried to trap him. And on each occasion, it was basically unsuccessful. But there again, I suppose you have to give some credit to the teacher of the law for at least having a go, even if it did land in failure. But it gave Jesus a wonderful platform to share with the people that were around him, as well as his own disciples, a wonderful truth. He couldn't have wished for a better opportunity to share one of the most powerful statements in all of the New Testament. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, and love your neighbour as yourself. I don't want to look at that whole verse, just the latter two little bits. Love your neighbour as you love yourself. Because it seems to me sometimes that in our modern society, the essence of that statement is sadly lacking. In order for anyone to love anybody, or even to love anything, there has to be some inner respect for oneself and some degree of love for oneself. A recent study of our modern society has found some disturbing figures. Between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 young girls over the age of 10 are potentially self-harming. Between 1 in 5 and 1 in 6 young boys over the age of 10 are potentially self-harming. The self-harm can be physical or psychological or a mixture of both. It could be no more than feeling anxious and tense and a bit rather bad behaviour, right through to the far extremes of anorexia, other eating disorders, attempted suicide, drug addiction, really very bad behaviour. A whole spectrum. The previous chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, a man that I have a great deal of time for, a man who's a great thinker and philosopher, has studied our society recently and has written some very interesting papers. And he was looking at our young generation. Now, this is not knocking our young generation at all. Not knocking them at all. It's stating some important facts. He reckons that this present young generation is one of the safest physically that there ever has been. But from an emotional point of view, it is the most brittle. Physically safe. Basically because the chances of our young generation having to go perhaps to fight is fairly small. But emotionally, very brittle. And he goes on to explain why he thinks there is a basis for this study and the findings of the study. It is a generation of comparison. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and many other social media platforms. A continual process of comparing themselves to others. Many longing for acceptance of who they are, what they are, how they dress, how they feel, how they act, what they've achieved, what they might achieve. This continual process of comparison brings major psychic problems in our young generation. And it might be partly accounting for the figure of 200 children under the age of 16 that committed suicide in 2017, 2018, out of the 5,000 plus in this United Kingdom that committed suicide during that time. Quite a sad indictment of our present day society. Society of comparison. From the moment of conception, we are unique. I am not like you. You are not like me in so many ways. Yes, there are things that are the same. But in some of the more fundamental ways, we are not the same. I do not need, no one needs necessarily to try and be like someone else. Not necessarily. This continual comparison to other people is demoralizing, it's demeaning, and it's extremely painful. Jesus says in this passage, love yourself. Now, he didn't mean mollycoddle yourself. He didn't mean go over the top. What he was saying was, be content with who you are, what you are, what you've achieved, or what you might achieve. Now, that doesn't mean that he won't change us, but be content at the moment with who you are. The idea that we should always be comparing ourselves, Jesus says, is not on. We are individuals and we are all precious in his sight. He died and he loves us for who we are now. Not who we'd like to be, but who we are now. That's the person he loves. That's the person he died for. As I say, he may want to change us, but as we stand here tonight, that's the person he loves. That is the feeling, and only that feeling, that is followed through to give us a peace and a contentment within our hearts and our minds. A contentment that helps us to cope with life. Oh, the number of people of all generations that have problems with self-identity, self-image. You only have to open the magazines to realize that somebody is trying to achieve something, to change themselves. And Jesus says, why? Why? I love you for who you are. I love you for what you are. And I died for you just as you are. When Jesus used to speak to people, one of the questions, it was a simple question apparently, was, what can I do for you? What is it that you want me to do for you? From a human point of view, the answer was often very obvious. To the blind man, he wanted to see. To the leper, he wanted to have clean skin. To the cripple, he wanted mobility back. But that's not quite what Jesus was asking. What Jesus was asking was, do you fully understand how your problem has changed you and your life and the people around you? What do I mean? If somebody has quite a nasty skin condition, it's highly unlikely that they will put on bikinis or shorts and no shirt top and walk around, particularly if the skin condition makes them want to scratch and they have rash all over them. What do? Well, you cover yourself up. And if it's really bad, what's the next thing you do? Well, you don't want to go out. So you pull away from everyday activity. You're too embarrassed. You're too shy. You just want to be in home. So you're pulled out of society and you become constricted. To the cripple, to the lame, often supported by friends and relatives, lovingly. But then, as things go on, that could so easily lead to total dependence on other people. And that's why when Jesus had restored them and healed them, the other thing he said to them was, go, your sins are forgiven. He didn't mean clear off, give somebody else a chance to be healed. That's not what he meant. He said, go, you are whole. You are healed. You have received. Just begin to enter life again. You are precious in my sight. Begin to love yourself for who you are. And as you love yourself, you will begin to love others. And that will be your neighbour or your friend. And hopefully, you will begin to love your God. The circle will have been complete. Love yourself, Jesus said. But do we? Do we? Not always. Even people in the church struggle with loving themselves. But without loving yourself, there is no contentment and there's no peace of heart or mind until that is established. And the modern concept in society, where as long as number one's all right, it's fine. Friends, it's fatally flawed, both from a personal point of view and a social point of view. And we look back at this teacher of the law. And for whatever reason, he just hadn't appreciated that he'd got to love his neighbour. In fact, it appears that he didn't even understand he'd got a neighbour. But how often you see that in our cities today? Go to an apartment block, particularly some of the posh ones, perhaps in one of the big cities, and ask them who their neighbour is. I guess quite a few of them would say, haven't got the faintest, hardly ever see them, don't know the names. I know there's a man and a woman, but I haven't got any idea. Is there any wonder why we have a society we've got like we have? If people don't stretch out and just acknowledge their neighbour. And if you read between the lines in this passage, this teacher of the law was more interested in the law of God than the love of God. Both start with the same letter L, but they're worlds apart. this Easter, as we go through this coming week, and we end next Sunday on Easter Sunday, he says to us again, learn to love yourself. And as you love yourself, let that love grow, because you and I know that the more love we give, the more we receive. And as we share his love with others, we break down barriers. There is no barrier that is too powerful to break his love down. And he challenges us this Easter. If you believe why I died on that cross, then love yourself. And as you love yourself, share that love with others. Because if ever there was a time in our society, in the United Kingdom, where we needed to share that love, that intensity of love, that agape, it's now. For too long, we have been isolationists. That has to change. That has to change, so that we can share his love and his truth and his grace with all those that we come in contact with. As you said earlier on, David, not forcing the scriptures into people's hearts, but just sharing his love. And then the scriptures will automatically get into their hearts, because they'll see something in you and me that they will want. Love yourself, and then learn to love others. Amen. We're going to sing a wonderful chorus now. Now, I was going to give you the history of it, but I'm not going to tonight. I think the chorus will say it all. When peace like the river attendeth my way, what a sorrow, when sorrows like sea billows roll. Whatever my lot, you have taught me to say, it is well. It is well with my soul. And if it isn't well, what are you going to do about it? What an opportunity this Easter to change that. Let's stand and sing together.